This is the IDP After Show.
Hey guys and girls, and welcome to the Week 16 IDP Preview Show with me, Jase Abbey, where, as usual, we'll be nominating and presenting to you the defensive players we think can help you win or lose your weekly fantasy matchup. I'm even more excited than usual, and that's because in addition to getting to talk to you guys about IDP, it's also the playoff season, and if that wasn't enough, I also get to welcome one of my favorite IDP analysts. It's PFF's resident IDP expert and a goddamn legend in this space, Mr. Jon Macri. Jon, welcome back to the show, my man. How are you?
I appreciate it, Jace. I'm doing great, man. I appreciate the kind words. I bet you say that to all the girls, but I'm very flattered and excited to be here and yeah, talk some IDP, man. I always appreciate you having me on, and I enjoy your work as well very much. So I'm happy to kind of chat some IDP with you and help people in the fantasy playoffs, because it's the most important time of the year right now for those that are still alive and in the hunt for a trophy. So I know, start-sit decisions get really stressful at this time of year, and those questions are crucial. So hopefully we could give them as much answers as we can and give them all the tools to go win this week and then hopefully next week as well.
Damn right. Now, speaking of the playoffs, I heard you and Nathan Yankee talking on the PFF pod about how your respective fantasy teams have fared in the playoffs so far. But for the benefit of our audience and me, because my memory is terrible, tell us how your teams are getting on so far.
So far, not too bad. Like the majority of teams have moved on. We have the one league that I'm in with, like Josh and Adam and Bobby and those guys. I didn't make it past the first round, unfortunately. I think I had the most points scored in the regular season, but that doesn't matter when it gets to the playoffs, obviously, right? So that's okay. We didn't make it there, but in pretty much all my other leagues, I've moved on. So that has been nice. There's still 2 more games left, so I don't really try to focus on the one win in the playoffs. I really just want to finish the season strong, but yeah, so far so good. I mean, my main league that I'm, we've been in for 13 years now. It's our home league, and I've made the playoffs every single year. And looking for a 5th championship in that one, and hopefully can finish it. But I've been cursed the past few years, as I like to say. But we'll see if we could break that curse this year.
That's how it goes sometimes, right? Yeah, it's been a bit hit or miss for me. I've kind of been bitten by the injury bug in some leagues, been downright terrible in 2 other leagues, actually. But in what I'd call, my main sort of 4 or 5 leagues, including my home league, and 1 or 2 of the newest leagues that I've joined as well in the past year. I'm pretty happy with how I've done. There's plenty of time for this to go very wrong yet. It's early in playoff season, right? But, considering where we are for in terms of things right now, I'm pretty content.
Good. Yeah. I mean, as long as you feel, no, I was going to say, yeah, as long as you feel good about it, man. And that's the thing. Like sometimes we could feel good going into the week. It only takes like 1 injury, right? And especially if it happens early in the game, like, I mean, Jalen Waddle got 0 points last week. That was the big one that killed me.
Yep.
And yeah, like those kill you, right? So you just got to stay healthy sometimes. So that's part of it.
Stay healthy and avoid those guys that are putting up 50 plus points. It's scary out there, isn't it? Right. But look, we've got a whole bunch of players to talk about tonight. But before we get into that, I've got one question for you, Jon, and it relates to the nominations that you're going to be presenting to us later in this show, and mine too, and also to the start-sit content that I know you produce over at PFF. Now, kind of what I want to know from you is, during the fantasy playoffs especially, to what extent does your player evaluations change based on whether players and the teams that they're playing for in the NFL have something at stake in the playoffs or not?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess it plays a part to an extent, right? Like, I think more, not so much for the teams that are maybe fighting for a playoff spot or have something to play for. But for me, I kind of lean the other way. The teams that are maybe mathematically like eliminated and players that maybe are a little bit banged up on those teams, you might see them, dealing with injuries, and there might not be a reason to kind of push through or play a full snap share, those kinds of things, maybe opt for surgery early, right? And shut down their season early, a la Max Crosby, right? So, And actually, there'll be probably another player that I talk about that I'm a little bit hesitant for similar reasons today. But yeah, like I think I look at it more from that terms, where I'm a little bit more hesitant and skeptical of those players on bad teams. But on the other side of it, it doesn't make like a huge difference for me whether they're pushing for a playoff spot or not. Like I know, if I know coming into the game that as long as they're active, that I'm typically going to feel pretty good about it, because I know some teams, even when they've clinched a playoff spot, they'll shut their players down too. But usually we don't see that till like the final week when the fantasy playoffs are over. So yeah, that's part of it. I guess the other thing too is to factor in, whether a team could win in a blowout and they're more likely to rest their players for like most of the fourth quarter, but that's not typically something we can predict or put too much stock into. So yeah, that's a lot of words to say, I guess. Like, to an extent it does play a part, but yeah, not as much as probably you would think, I guess.
Yeah, it definitely factors in for me. But I think it's probably a bit of an unfair question to talk about in such vague terms, and we'll kind of like play some of this out when we start talking about our nominations. But one of the things I think that does get overlooked sometimes is how important continuity is to some of these teams to keep their players together, to keep their starters together, to kind of know what they've got going in, especially if some of those guys are rookies or inexperienced younger players, right? They kind of want to get as much game time as they can. To stand themselves in good stead and to carry that momentum over into the playoffs. We see it every year, right? The teams that are hot toward the end of the season, especially in these last few games, do tend to do pretty well. I've got literally no stats to back that up, but that's generally how it feels to me sometimes. And I think that point can get maybe overlooked sometimes when we're talking about guys sometimes resting or teams sometimes resting their players. And yeah, like you say, if they've got something to fight for, maybe that's not the be all and end all. But yeah, it's sometimes the deciding factor between two guys who I might have ranked really evenly, perhaps. So yeah, it's an interesting point.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at it as a tiebreaker, I think it makes sense in that sense, right? Like, it's a good point.
Yeah. So look, John, are you ready to delve into these players? As I said, we've got quite a lot to get through tonight. As you know, we're going to alternate back and forth between our choices, and as a kind of a one-off, because it's the playoffs and because it's super important that we help people get their lineups right this week, perhaps even more than any other week so far. We're going to talk about some of the other players that we considered as likes and dislikes at each position this week. So we're going to alternate going back and forth between our primary nominations, and then we're going to just have a quick fire mention of some of the other guys that we were thinking about nominating as our primary guy, perhaps. So John, it feels only right to start with linebackers. I've toyed with the idea of mixing it up, but let's face it, this is what people really want to know about, isn't it? Right. So why don't you kick us off and tell us about the linebacker you think can help IDP managers to a much needed win in week 16?
Yeah, so I ended up going with Christian Harris of the Houston Texans going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. And the reason that I chose him is not like I have him as an LB1 or anything like that, but I do think that people are likely wondering if Harris is a safe start and kind of what to do with the Texans linebackers now that he's back in the picture, right? So he returned last week after missing the first 14 games of the year and immediately stepped back into a starting role. And I think that was promising to see. And it wasn't a 100% snap role. It was 82%. He looked good in that role. The Texans are typically a 2 full-time linebacker team. So I think, that first week back, I think it makes sense that he didn't necessarily play a 100% of snaps right away. And I think with him looking good, I think he likely increases his workload as well, kind of into this week and then potentially next week as well if he doesn't get to 100%. But I do imagine that he's going to be up over 90% this week. We like that for Christian Harris. We like that for all our linebackers. We want them to be close to that 100% snap roll, if not right on. So I think with Christian Harris specifically, it was really promising to see first game of the year. It's been so long since he played to immediately play 82% of snaps. That was the most promising thing for me. He's also going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, who look like Patrick Mahomes is going to play, which is a good sign for the Texans defense because Kansas City will be able to more effectively get plays on offense and get us tackle opportunities. So yeah, I mean, the Chiefs are giving up the 8th most tackles per game right now to opposing linebackers, so that definitely helps his case a little bit. Henry To'o is also still a full-time player. We don't have to worry about that. Both of these guys can definitely be useful. Neville Hewitt is a non-factor now for people that were wondering about him. But yeah, I'm ready to roll with Christian Harris here and hope that he can have a nice week in week 15 or week 16 now, because yeah, he's missed the entire year. He's got some time to make up for it.
He does. And that 82% snap share was kind of nice to see, surprising to me, if I'm honest. I didn't expect him to kind of hit the ground running in that way, even with, Al-Shaair out. I thought he might be eased back in a little more than he was, but, he's clearly healthier than we imagined, or at least I imagined. And, let's face it, as you say, he's a much better player than Hewitt or Hansen. Harris, for me, is a really interesting point. He's one of those guys that looked terrible first year and then inconsistent maybe in second year, but there was enough bright spots to kind of make me kind of excited about his long-term future. So I know we're talking about this talking about him on a weekly basis here, but he's a guy that I was writing up as a dynasty buy a couple of weeks back based on what we saw in year 2. So yeah, really great to see him hit the ground running in week 15, with an 82% snap share. Can't wait to see what's coming this week as well.
Yeah, it'll be fun. They play on Saturday this week too, so get a little bit of an early peek at some of the players. So that'll be nice.
For sure. So my primary nomination at linebacker in this segment, I've kind of gone with Old Faithful, and I surprised myself a little bit with this one because my choice of the guy I think can help IDP managers this week is as old as dirt, John. Still younger than me, but as old as dirt. Bobby Wagner. And I say surprised because, let's face it, he's, apart from his age, or should that be kind of because of his age, hasn't been quite the same player this week or this year in terms of production, at least. And assuming he doesn't go off on a sort of a Chris Borland sort of circa 2014 fashion to end the season, he is, I'm kind of sad to say, going to finish outside the top 10 at the position for the first time. I think it's the first time in about a decade. And that's, despite being available all year, which is good. But he's still playing well, right? 12.3% tackle efficiency is okay. And crucially, the main reason I'm talking about him here is this matchup with the Eagles. Opposition linebackers have racked up a pretty high volume of tackles against Philly this year. And thinking back to, our earlier conversation about players on teams with everything to play for, I don't think it hurts Wagner's chances of a big week this week, considering he's a veteran guy, in the twilight of his career, playing for a team with a chance to make the playoffs. I mean, John, let's face it, this might be his last chance in a situation like this, right?
It's getting pretty close. If not this year, then potentially next year. But yeah, I mean, Bobby Wagner, you're right. He has been Old Faithful. The past couple of years or so. Like he did. You're right. He had a nice year last year as far as production goes, but he was still inefficient as a tackler, so he has like kind of decreased his efficiency with age, and it's not a huge surprise to see that kind of continue this year. But the main thing for him is like he's been healthy. He remains healthy. He doesn't deal with a lot of injuries, right? So that's why I kind of think like maybe he does play another season because he's he hasn't been as banged up as other linebackers. But yeah, it's definitely possible that this is it as well. So I'm with you. I like the matchup this week. Eagles definitely given up a lot. I think it was 4th most last when I updated it, 4th most tackles per game to linebackers. So yeah, he's been solid. He's not he's not nearly as inefficient as like Frankie Luvu, for example, as a tackler. He's much more consistent and solid with his production, where Luvu is kind of up and down, very boom bust. So I'm with you. I like relying on Bobby Wagner this week.
Yeah, and I must say I'm open to criticism that I might be being a bit sentimental with this pick, right? But it is what it is, and I stand by it. So, yeah, look, John, let's hear your quick hitters, your quick list of other linebackers that you like this week.
Sure. So I went with just more some like fringe guys here that, because there's a lot of deep leagues out there, a lot of people that are looking for fill-ins. There's a lot of injuries at the position still, and people looking for replacements. So I picked out a couple players that I think could still be fine fill-in options this weekend. The first one that stood out was Tyrice Knight of the Seattle Seahawks. So Knight actually played a full-time role for the first time in his NFL career this past week. And the Seahawks, interestingly, he was the only linebacker that they did not give that full-time role to as a starter, right? They gave it to Tyrell Dodson, Jerome Baker, and Ernest Jones. But obviously, Knight being a fifth-round rookie, I understand why there was some hesitancy there. But last week, they did seem like they were comfortable in giving him that full-time role against Green Bay. So a very good offense. It's not like they were playing, well, I don't want to make fun of any teams or anything, but, Carolina Panthers or like something like that, right? Bryce Young's played better too. There's whatever. Anyways, so Knight has really kind of been like a deep league only type option for the most part for this season, because he's been around that 75% snap share, 3/4 of snaps usually, right? So now it seems like the team is at least feeling better about trusting him in that every down role, which was previously manned by guys like Dodson and Jerome Baker when they were starters there. So I do feel a little bit more confident about, if you have to put a Tyrice Knight in your lineup, even if it isn't the great matchup, nothing matters more than snaps, right? So if he's going to be a 100% snap player, that really helps his case here to make a few more lineups and be viable in a wider range of leagues.
Yep.
Should I go with more?
Yeah, please go on. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. And the other one I went with was another guy that I think should play full-time snaps is Eric Wilson of the Green Bay Packers. This is a guy that probably will fly under the radar a bit, but he is the full-time replacement for Quay Walker when Quay Walker is out. So we actually saw this in week 7 and week 8 when Quay Walker missed time. And then we saw it again last week in week 15. So what happened was Walker is the immediate, Wilson is the immediate Walker replacement, where Edgerrin Cooper and Isaiah McDuffie actually rotated about 50-50. They switched drives and took turns there. So Eric Wilson didn't do much in that role last week. I think he had like 1 tackle or something really low. But either way, again, snaps are what we're looking for. It's a decent matchup. The Saints are 8th in the league in giving tackles to linebackers. So if you're in a desperate spot, like I have Eric Wilson kind of in that very low end LB3 range. But again, he's somebody that in deeper leagues, I might potentially try to pick him up and start him, because I'm dealing with injuries and stuff like that as well. So Eric Wilson definitely becomes an option for me.
Okay, yeah. So I'm going to pivot straight from your Eric Wilson to Edgerrin Cooper. And I know that you're right in terms of what you're saying about Wilson being the direct replacement for Walker. But if I was to play devil's advocate for a minute here, John, do you think that continues to be the case? It seems more likely than not, given what we've seen. We've seen this happen in more than just one week and in more than just the most recent week, right? But do you think that there's any possibility, or do you think it's likely, rather, that given how unproductive Wilson was last week, again, in much the same way as he's been for most of the season, and how well Cooper played, as well as how productive he was, that we see some change perhaps in that utilization next week? I wonder whether that's the case, which is the reason why I mentioned Cooper as someone that I'm kind of interested in for week 16. Sure. And, the reservation we have around the fact that he probably isn't going to be 100% snap share guy, Cooper, an every down guy this week. In fact, almost certainly isn't going to be, was enough for me not to mention him as my primary nomination. But I kind of wanted to talk about him partly because he's just such an interesting player who's kind of like trending in the right direction, but also because I'm wondering whether there is some kind of like change in what we've seen so far. It's dangerous to kind of like set your lineup on the basis that something might change based on how players have played in very small sample sizes, I know, but it's an intriguing point.
It really is, because like you said, he's actually been very good. Like you said, he's been productive. He's making exciting plays and things like that. So I wouldn't rule it out completely. I just don't know that it's likely that he takes over that full-time role. I think more importantly than, production is just how much trust the coaches have in a linebacker to be full-time and to call plays and get the defense set up and things like that, and just be on the field doing everything that they need to do. Where Edgerrin Cooper, like he's very good already. He's a second round pick. He's got a lot of talent. And I think he will be a full-time player rather quickly, whether it's, potentially this week or next season. But I think, for his role right now and what they ask him to do, it's a little bit more straightforward in that, he's rushing the passer quite a bit, and he's playing a more simplistic kind of linebacker role, where somebody like Eric Wilson is been trained more in that kind of lead linebacker role, right? So a little bit different. Like I said, I wouldn't rule it out completely. It doesn't mean that I don't like Edgerrin Cooper this week. I think because of how productive he is when he is on the field, I think he can still be a viable start, and probably more for deeper leagues, because I think there is that risk of him not playing 100% of snaps and continuing to rotate with Isaiah McDuffie. And then, before he got hurt, Edgerrin Cooper, they were starting to rely on him a little bit more, not in the 100% role like what they were with Quay Walker, but he did get up to like 72% of snaps. I think it was the week before he got injured. So they had started to give him more work coming out of their bye week. And now it's kind of, regressed a little bit because, coming back from injury and stuff. And then obviously with Quay Walker out, so they might want a little bit more experience back there. But, I wouldn't rule it out. I like him as a fine start this week in those deeper leagues, but I do still think that Eric Wilson will be kind of their lead guy, just based on everything they've shown us so far.
I tend to think you're right. It's definitely one to monitor this week, and it'll be really interesting to see how it shakes out next weekend. But yeah, it's an interesting point. The other couple of mentions I want to have here: Malik Harrison, ideal tackle production. In terms of his matchup against the Steelers this week, 79% usage in week 15. We saw Simpson's role diminish massively, and there is that question: is that going to continue? I think that probably will, based on what Harbaugh had to say. Seems to suggest that he's thinking Simpson needs to sit and learn for a little bit, and that maybe he threw him into the fire a little early. So. I kind of like Harrison. Again, for those deeper leagues, 79% isn't ideal. You don't want him in, leagues where you're maybe starting 2-3 linebackers, maybe as a 3, certainly as a 4. But yeah, Harrison's one to keep an eye on. And TJ Edwards as well. Excellent matchup again versus the Lions. Was thinking about mentioning Tremaine Edmonds as well, but then went and had another look at the tackle efficiency, which I suspected may be the case. There is a sizable gap between the two. Edwards is the obvious choice, and actually removed my intention of mentioning Edmonds from my notes here. So they're my other guys this week. So John, tell us who you've chosen as the main linebacker fade on your list for week 16.
Yeah, so for fade, I went with Jahlani Tavai of the New England Patriots. So again, probably not a player that people are overly excited about to get into lineups in the first place, or he might not be starting in a huge wide range of leagues. But again, looking at more deeper leagues here, Jahlani Tavai, he's played an 85% snap share, or below an 85% snap share, in 3 of his past 4 games. He's also not a very good linebacker and can be a liability at times. So he'll be going up against the Buffalo Bills offense that is very capable of taking advantage of him as their middle linebacker. So I do imagine that, he's going to continue to come off the field on obvious passing downs, which is something that they've shown to do. And it's also possible that, the Bills blow them out and they just run a ton, which does play into his viability a little bit. But I do think that they trust Kyle Duggar and Jabril Peppers a little bit more to help out in the box, mostly Duggar. So and they got guys like Christian Ellis and Sione Takitaki as well. So they've been a very heavy rotation in New England. So Jahlani Tavai, we often go through, the depth charts and stuff. We see who the lead linebackers are, who we can potentially trust in matchups. I also I didn't have the data for it. I could pull it up quickly, but I don't love the matchup here for New England this week going against the Buffalo Bills. So Tavai, for me, he was a 100% or close to it player for a little bit there, but they've gone back to rotating him away from that 100% full-time snap share. So he's just somebody that I'm mostly going to be looking to avoid because, yeah, he's not a good player, and it's just a, let me see, New England is, I don't know, I can't see. Oh, here we are. They're just an average matchup. They rank tied for 14th as far as linebacker tackles go. But they've been below their average over the last 3 games as well. So, yeah.
Tavai. And Tavai's 11.3% tackle efficiency isn't quite where we want it to be. It's not dreadful, but it's not quite where we want it to be. I might have been willing to argue the case if Ellis was going to be out, but I saw that he's been left off the injury report after suffering that head injury last week. Now, with that said, and kind of this like plays into your favor in terms of fading Tavai this week, but he's got a groin injury himself, hasn't he? And he was limited in practice, so that kind of adds to reasons to avoid him this week. So I like this call, John.
Cool.
I've gone with Omar Speights this week as my Week 16 linebacker fade. And I kind of have to point out from the off that his tackle efficiency has been incredible, 17.8%. I don't know where you use the cutoff, John. 100 snaps is about it for me.
Sure.
Tends to rule out those outliers who perform super well for very with a very small snap share or in just 1 or 2 games. But yeah, 17.8%. I think it ranks something like second out of all linebackers this year who have played at least 100 snaps, and it's certainly helped him deliver a couple of bigger weeks than he would have had otherwise, and that's really nice to see sometimes. But in a week like this, I think with no teams on a bye and in the fantasy playoffs where we can't risk a dud, the idea of starting a guy for me with a 60 to 70% snap share just kind of worries the hell out of me, John. And if that wasn't enough of a reason, the Rams as a matchup, the Rams matchup with the Jets is not a favorable one either in terms of tackle production for opposition linebackers. So yeah, it's kind of simple reasoning here, and sometimes it makes sense that we look to other factors too. But when that snap volume isn't close to being where I want, that's enough for me to avoid starting a guy like Speights, unless I'm desperate. And there are teams out there that are desperate given the slew of injuries we've had recently. But yeah, Speights is a hard pass for me. What say you, John?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. He's kind of a deep league like desperation play. Really, we can't rely on the tackle efficiency as much as we can the snaps, and the snaps have kind of been down for him all year. It's really been they've tried him out ahead of Christian Roseboom, but Roseboom has clearly been I think the better linebacker, as wild as that is to say. But yeah, Roseboom, he's also been like incredibly efficient. He's like I've been calling him like Alex Kingleton 2.0 or Princeton. I've been calling just because like he doesn't play a full-time role, and he's putting up these ridiculous tackle numbers that you would think he's playing like 80 snaps a week, but really he's also in that kind of 80% snap range. So yeah, they're both these guys really efficient in a zone heavy offense. But the problem is, like you said, there might only be room for one this week, and I would much rather go for Roseboom. The Jets are 30th in tackles per game to the linebacker position.
Yeah, just ugh. So who did you consider? Who else did you consider rather at linebacker this week?
Yeah, so the other guys that I put Troy Dye of the Los Angeles Chargers, and this is one where people might look at the box score, might look at his IDP production and think that he's a safe start, but he's really not. He had a really nice game in Week 15, 9 tackles and a sack. The problem is that he's playing lower than 60% of the defensive snaps right now, which is typical of this Chargers linebacker rotation. So for all the reasons that you mentioned with Omar Speights, I feel the very same way about Troy Dye. It's very hard to trust, and I don't want to be risking, chasing that production outside of the deepest leagues again. But it's the playoffs, it's semifinals now. We can't afford to be relying on 60% snap guys that we know are going to play that low of a snap share too. So if we could find better options, I mentioned a couple of the 100% snap guys, Eric Wilson and Tyrice Knight, and Dorian Williams as well is another guy that might get an opportunity this week if Matt Milano's out there. There's some better options out there that I would trust over Dye.
Yeah, especially with Colson kind of returning to the fold a few weeks ago in his role growing slightly, and him playing a little better as well, which kind of gives me some optimism as a Coulson fan that he'll continue to see an increased snap share as the weeks unfold. So yeah, I like that die pick. I've gone with a former Chargers linebacker in Drue Tranquill. And this is simply because his snap share hasn't been ideal. Again, 69% to 87%. It's kind of been floating between those two numbers since week 5. And he's got a poor matchup against the Texans this week. And then my other guy was Kenneth Murray. And I feel bad in terms of how much I criticize Kenneth Murray. Obviously, he's been very productive. Don't think he's a very good player, but it's not about how well he plays. His production and his tackle efficiency have both improved recently. But it's a terrible matchup against the Colts for those Tennessee linebackers. And so, yeah, I'm kind of fading him this week. I'd still start him in the majority of leagues, but if I was loaded at the position, then I might look in a different direction.
Yeah, I think it's a good call. I mean, he's definitely on the lower end of as far as like 100% snap linebackers go, for all those reasons you said. I think the most interesting thing for Tennessee is going to be who's going to play that second linebacker spot. I don't know if Luke Gifford's going to be back. I don't know if Otis Reese is going to be back, or if they're willing to go back to Jerome Baker at this point. It's going to be a bit of a mess there to sort out, but they got options. That they're not very good, but hopefully one of them can emerge and be useful for IDP, but we'll find out.
Yeah, we will. But would you want to take that gamble this week on any of those other guys? I wouldn't want to. I can't predict who's going to be that guy. So for that reason, I'd be looking in other directions. Some of the other guys that we talked about on our likes list.
Yeah. Unless we know like Luke Gifford is going to play, because it does seem like they're going to trust him. But that's the only one. But like you said, it's also a bad matchup. 31st, the Colts are in tackles to linebackers. So it just gets even riskier there. So Gifford would really be the only one that I'd actually feel okay about trusting if I had to.
All right, John, linebackers are done. Let's talk about those guys on the defensive line. Which edge rusher or interior defensive lineman do you think can deliver the goods in week 16?
So I went with Chris Jones of the Kansas City Chiefs, which it right away, like just coming out of my mouth, it feels insane to say that we have to trust Chris Jones. But I get a lot of questions about Chris Jones because I think there are people frustrated with his production this year. But I would still consider him kind of a must-start defensive tackle in DT tackle required leagues. We're playing for upside at the defensive line position for the most part, and there aren't many interior defensive linemen that offer as much upside as Chris Jones. He leads the position with a 90.7 pass rush grade with 66 pressures. He's second in win rate at 17.5%. The thing is, like, he only has 5 sacks on the year, right? So people look at that, they get a little bit frustrated. He had back-to-back years of double-digit sacks, but that is like, it's incredibly difficult to replicate that production, even for the Aaron Donalds and the Chris Joneses of the world across an entire season, right? But we bet on the players who are talented enough to win us our weeks with that level of upside in any given matchup. And this does happen to be a great matchup going against the Houston Texans. The Texans' interior offensive line owns a bottom 10 pass blocking grade on the year, 58.0 as a unit. And as that unit, they are responsible for 21 sacks against CJ Stroud. That leads the NFL as far as interior offensive line units being responsible for sacks. I highlighted that last week. I think it was with Zach Sealer, so it's fresh in my mind. Zach Sealer landed 1.5 sacks. Chris Jones is definitely in that range as well. And then you look at CJ Stroud himself. He owns a bottom 10 pressure to sack conversion rate on the year. So he's also responsible for a lot of the sacks that he's taken this year, which is the second most in the league behind only Caleb Williams. So continuing to plug Chris Jones into lineup. He, of course, has the potential to lay a goose egg, but we're hoping to get a better production floor from some of those other positions, linebacker, defensive back, to help fill that, that the potential void there. Well, Chris Jones, we're playing for the upside and to help us win our week. So yeah, I'm definitely still trusting him.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning that, a lot of the pressure that he has faced has been generated by interior pass rushers, or at least pass rushers who are rushing against those interior linemen, right? My mind goes back to that game against the Jets. And I was talking about this either on a recent show or writing it up in a recent article. Quinnen Williams, had his way with that Texans OL, and I think that Jones could do the same this week. So, yeah, good call.
Thanks.
I've gone with a player from the same game as your choice, in fact, but on the other side of the ball, and Will Anderson is my selection here, and it's an obvious choice for many people, I'd imagine, but I just couldn't overlook, John, all the things that are kind of going in Anderson's favor this week. Mahomes has allowed more pressure than any other quarterback, or been responsible for as many or more pressures than any other quarterback in 2024. He wasn't sacked last week against the Browns, but that was a bit of an anomaly, I think, considering the Chiefs have allowed almost 4 sacks per game on average over their last 6. The Chiefs' offensive tackles are responsible for allowing a high percentage of those sacks, and opposition defensive linemen have also generated tackles at a high rate versus KC too. So even if Anderson somehow doesn't get home and sack Mahomes, we know it's going to be now at quarterback, I think there is that high weekly floor that he might generate, or could generate, has a chance to generate good tackle volume. Now I know he's been a bit. You could say that Anderson's been a bit fortunate to have 11 sacks, considering he's only had 46 pressures. But for me, that's not like an egregious imbalance in terms of a ratio. And I think he's clearly played well. So I think with all the factors I've mentioned here working in his favor, in week 16, he should feast here, John, right?
He should. I mean, I'm with you. It's always hard betting on sacks, right? Even for any player, for Chris Jones or for whoever. So yeah, Will Anderson, I'm with you. And the nice thing I think about this matchup too is the Chiefs had to move Joe Thuney, their left guard. They had to move him to left tackle last game, which Joe Thuney, very, very good left guard, but not necessarily very, very good left tackle. And we saw that last week. He finished that game with, I think it was like a 48 pass blocking grade, and he allowed 10 pressures from that left tackle spot. He had his worst game of the year. So it's a great matchup for Will Anderson, because Will Anderson is going to line up primarily against Joe Thuney, and him and Danielle Hunter, they'll switch, so they'll get their opportunities there. But yeah, I'm with you. I think it's a prime matchup here. Mahomes has usually done a pretty good job avoiding sacks as much as he invites pressure, but that's been changing recently in recent weeks, where he has started to allow a little bit more. And obviously dealing with a potential ankle sprain here, that's not going to make him any more mobile. So I like it.
Yeah. So which other defensive lineman are you targeting this week?
So the other guys that I put Gregory Rousseau of the Buffalo Bills. He really should, at this point, should be in lineups almost every week, just based on his level of play this year. He's like edge 7 on the year as far as our IDP scoring goes. He's been really good. 7.5 sacks on the year, 4 over his last 6 games. The main thing for Greg Rousseau is he's facing Demontre Jacobs this week at right tackle. Demontre Jacobs, for those who don't know, is not very good. I believe he ranks either last or within the bottom 3 or 4 offensive tackles in terms of pass blocking grade this season. Gregory Rousseau in the midst of a career year here as far as his pass rush metrics go. I think he's 1 sack away from setting a new career high there. He's like 3 pressures away, I think it is, or 3 or 4 pressures away from setting a new career high there. He's just been playing on another level this year. His snap share has been excellent, as much as we've been hoping for in a breakout year. So Gregory Rousseau was definitely somebody that I wanted to highlight. And then the other one I put was Rashan Gary, who he's been disappointing this year because he was off to a slow start. But he does have 5.5 sacks over his last 8 games, which is a good number. He's going to line up against both offensive tackles for the New Orleans Saints. So mostly versus right tackle Trevor Penning, who ranks 71st among 80 qualifying offensive tackles in pass blocking grade. And then helping matters for Rashan Gary is that the Saints are likely to start Spencer Rattler at quarterback, who owns a 28% pressure to sack conversion rate, which is the 3rd worst mark among quarterbacks this season. Rashan Gary, look, the pass rush metrics, they haven't been what we've wanted them to be this year. They haven't been strong enough to kind of push him into that maybe top 12 or top 15 edge defenders for even a week like this. But I think the matchup itself and in his production as of late offers enough of a boost to kind of have him in that low end edge 2 range this week.
Yeah, I just want to touch briefly on the Demontre Jacobs point. Yeah. He's a player that we've picked on quite a few times on this show, to the point where I feel like I've probably alienated a lot of the Patriots fans out there, but they must be as frustrated with what he's done this year. I don't have the stats in front of me, but I remember looking back at how many pressures he'd allowed. He was like top 3 in pressures allowed, pretty much top 3 in sacks, and he'd played far fewer pass blocking snaps than any other offensive tackle at that point in the season. And I'd be surprised if that wasn't still the case now. Pretty dreadful. So yeah, him and the two Titans tackles as well are people that we've kind of gone back to again and again this year in terms of those matchups. So yeah, I like those selections, John.
Yeah.
Mine are Danielle Hunter for all the reasons that I mentioned with Will Anderson. You mentioned that these two guys switch around. They do, so I know that he's going to be lining up against some of the same poor tackles that Will Anderson will. And then Nick Herbig as well. And this is conditional, if Watt misses time with that ankle injury, Herbig's been excellent. There's no other word for it when given the opportunity this year, hasn't he, right? And we know that the Ravens aren't typically a good matchup for opposition edge rushers in terms of sack production. Lamar Jackson just so damn good, too damn fast. And one or two of their tackles have been playing amazingly well at times this year as well. But yeah, I do like the idea that they are a good matchup for tackle production for those edge guys, so, or at least for the defensive linemen. So there is that. Even if Herbig doesn't get home again, maybe there's a bit of a weekly flaw. But again, it's going back to whether or not Watt plays this week, really.
Yeah, that definitely plays a big part in it, right? Just as far as like snap share and getting just a few more opportunities, because every snap matters against Lamar Jackson, because like you said, he's just so elusive. He's really hard to take down, and that offensive line has been pretty solid in pass blocking. And I'll be interested to see like if TJ Watt misses this game, because the Steelers have been pretty set on playing like Watt against the right tackle, Highsmith against the left tackle, or Herbig against the left tackle, because Highsmith missed time. But I'll be curious to see which one plays against the right tackle this week, because it is Rosengarten, I think it was, who hasn't been as good.
No,
or they could also rotate as well, but that is the better side as well, to go after Lamar Jackson if you are going to get a sack on him. So be a fun one to watch.
It's a good point. So dislikes, defensive line.
So I went with Tuli Tuipulotu of the Los Angeles Chargers. He is playing on Thursday night against the Denver Broncos. He has disappointed a bit recently, just a half sack over his last 4 games. And last week didn't even manage a single pressure, and he had a 0% win rate as well. So we knew kind of that, Tuipulotu, he was bound to regress. He had like this hot streak of like 7 sacks in 4 games between weeks 8 and 11, which was crazy. And even considering his snap share, right now, it's not bad. And because he's still mixing in there with the starters, Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa. So he hasn't been relegated so badly that he isn't getting playing time. I just worry about him in this matchup specifically, as he's really just like an average pass rusher who has kind of outperformed his expected sack total so far. And in a difficult matchup against the Denver Broncos offensive line, they rank first in the league in terms of pass blocking grade as a unit. Bo Nix has also done a really nice job avoiding sacks. That's a trait that he's carried over from college. He has just a 13.1% pressure to sack conversion rate. That's a strong number. So I do worry a little bit about Tuipulotu's pass rush ability in this matchup. The other part of his game that has IDP value is his run defense, or it was more last year than this year, but it has allowed for like a decent tackle floor. But the Broncos are also ceding the 3rd lowest tackles per game to opposing defensive linemen. So really just don't like this matchup at all for Tuli. Obviously, with these guys that we don't like on defensive line, it only takes 1 sack to make their day. But when I look at, these matchups, the odds are kind of against him this week. So he'd be somebody that I'd be avoiding.
Yeah, and you mentioned that hot streak. That was like a really hot streak, wasn't it? Right, it was really nice to see. And this, as you mentioned, the snap share has kind of recovered a little bit, at least in the last game at max expense. But as I was looking through the pass rush snaps, going back to that hot streak when he had, 2, 4, 7, 8, at least a minimum of 8 sacks over like 4-game streak. He was rushing the passer 28 times, 43, 26, 47 times in those 4 games. And in those recent 4 games, you mentioned he didn't have a sack last week. He's had 0 pressures and 0 sacks, obviously, in 3 of his last 4 games. And in those games, 14 pass rush snaps, 18, 24, 13. that's a massive drop off, and obviously game script hasn't really helped in that sense. But yeah, I feel like this is something that's kind of affected all of the Chargers edge rushers, because Mac, Bosa, these guys haven't been feasting in the last or over the last month. So yeah, I'm right there with you on Tuipulotu. I think he has done well in terms of his production at times in the last 2 seasons, better than I imagined he would. But yeah, I'm not a big fan this week, or in general, to be honest with you. And I say this as a Chargers fan.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, I think he's been good, but I don't think he's been nearly as good as what his production will tell you.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a very succinct and much more neat way of putting it than mine. So my nomination's Carl Granderson, and I'd like him as a player, John. I think he kind of flies under the radar, kind of a bit of an opposite in Tuipulotu, I guess, for some IDP managers. He does, he's enjoyed a pretty good season, I think. He's knocking on the door of double-digit sacks, as he does pretty much every year, and he's been generating really good pressure rate in the last couple of 4 games. I think it is 22 pressures I think he's got, and that's really nice. But this one's about the matchup, and I care more about the matchup for these edge guys than I do sometimes for defensive backs and even for linebackers. Jordan Love hasn't faced much pressure. To his credit, he's avoided the pressure he has got. The Packers OTs, Zach Tom, Rasheed Walker have played as well as any pair of offensive tackles, I think, this year. And for that reason alone, for those reasons alone, rather, I don't like Granderson as much as I normally would. I did almost change my mind when I noticed that the Packers are a solid matchup for opposition defensive linemen in terms of tackle numbers, but that wasn't enough to sway me in the end. So with all of that said, John, we're still starting Granderson in deeper leagues, aren't we? Starting 3 after defensive lineman, unless you're loaded at the position, you're going to be starting a guy who's got nearly 10 sacks this season. But like I say, I like him less than I normally would. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. It's one of the worst pass rushing matchups in the league this season for edge rushers because of Zach Tom and Rasheed Walker, and the combination of how good Jordan Love has been at avoiding, letting pressures turn into sacks. He's been one of the best in the league in that regard. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think, if you're in a league where Granderson has been a weekly starter for you, that's probably not going to change much, and you're going to hope that he falls into a sack or at least some tackle production at the very least, because he does get a decent snap share, and that's kind of what we're hoping for from these guys a lot of the times, and the sacks are really just a bonus. So I'm with you.
So who else is on our shitty step at the defensive line this week?
Yeah, so leading the shitty step names here, I guess it was Kayvon Thibodeaux of the New York Giants, who had another game of just terrible pass rush grades again this past week. I struggle with this because I like Thibodeaux as a player. I liked him as a prospect, but he really has not been very good in the NFL. He's had seasons where he's gotten sacks, but like all the underlying metrics point to a guy that just is bound for regression, and that's what we've seen this year. He was a big regression candidate coming into the season, and was low in the ranks for me, and it's just kind of continued here. There's been some injury stuff as well, but when he's in there, he just hasn't been very good. So this week, he is facing the Atlanta Falcons, and the Atlanta Falcons are starting Michael Penix at quarterbacks. Now, Penix, his calling card in college was that he was one of the best quarterbacks, one of the best quarterback prospects in recent history at avoiding sacks. He finished his very long college career with just a 6.5% pressure to sack conversion rate, which is an elite mark, especially considering the amount of games guys played. So looking at matchups like this and looking at guys like Kayvon Thibodeaux, he has a 66.2 pass rush grade. That's 49th among edge defenders. It's not terrible. It's better than what it's been, but it's very average at best. Last week against Baltimore in another tough matchup, he had a 0% win rate and a 47.8 pass rush grade. That's the second time this season that he's finished with a pass rush grade below 50, which is really hard to do for a player that's playing as much as he is, and especially when you consider the prospect profile coming out of college. So he's been a big disappointment so far. I hope that I've motivated him to do better here, because like I said, I do like him, but I have a really hard time trusting him in the playoffs and in the fantasy football semifinals here.
Yeah, like it. I've gone with Chase Young for all the same reasons as Granderson. Doesn't really matter that he sticks almost exclusively to one side because, as we mentioned, both of these offensive tackles are really very good and Love really good at avoiding those sacks. Avoiding those pressures that do come his way and not allowing teams to convert them into sacks. And I've also mentioned Keion White. Although he's not mentioned on screen there, Christian Barmore too. These are guys that I know they're unlikely to be in any starting lineups anyway, but they have a terrible matchup with the Bills. They've, I think, surrendered the least sacks, if not the least, then second least to the Packers in 2024. Haven't allowed a single sack in the last 4 games. I just want no part of any defensive line that's going up against them, really, most weeks going forward. And that includes these Patriots guys who just aren't very good at the moment. I do like Barmore, and I did like what White was doing earlier in the year, just not the week to start them.
Yep. No, I'm with you. Josh Allen, we talked about the elusiveness of Lamar Jackson. Josh Allen has been just as elusive. So, and playing behind just as good of an offensive line as far as pass blocking goes. So, with you.
Yeah. So, ready to talk DBs, John?
Let's do it.
Are you sure? They're not for everyone.
Yeah, especially this first one, because he has not been a name that's been a favorite of mine, but I'm willing to go to bat for him here, maybe.
Okay. Well, hit me with that name. Who you got?
Yeah, so I went with Minkah Fitzpatrick, who has been Stinka Fitzpatrick this season, but I really only like him if Deshaun Elliott is out this week, because Deshaun Elliott was out last week, and what we saw was a pretty major shift in Minkah Fitzpatrick's deployment. So with Elliott out last week, Fitzpatrick actually played 45% of his snaps in the box, where coming into that game, he had only played 13% in the box on the season. So it was a huge difference there, and it made a difference in his production as well. He managed 8 total tackles, which, it was a mark that he had not hit since week 5 of this year. So he had really just been low production every single week because he's playing exclusively deep. So with Elliott out, they'll actually let DeMonte Casey play that deep role and allow Minkah Fitzpatrick to come up closer to the line of scrimmage, soak up some tackles in the box, potentially chase down Lamar Jackson as well. He'd become a top 15 play for me if we know that Deshaun Elliott is out. Otherwise, I would prefer Elliott for that same role. And the Ravens have been a good matchup for safety tackles as well.
Yeah, I want to like this more than I do, John, based on how he was used last week. I was looking at the numbers, and he played something like as many box snaps last week as he did, or just one fewer than he did over the first 7 games combined. And that that's a reason to like him. I'm just not sure I'm ready to forgive him for what he hasn't done so far this season, and really for the lack of big play production over the last 2 seasons. I know it's not something that we need to chase for these defensive backs ordinarily, but I'm not ready to forgive him, and that matchup isn't quite enough. Isn't quite good enough to sway me, I don't think. So, I understand your reasoning. It's all sound reasoning, but he's on my naughty step, and I'm not ready to let him off just yet.
I think it's fair. Yeah, it's definitely hard to forgive and forget when it comes to an entire season of just down production. But I like the role, so we'll see how it goes this week if Elliott is out.
I suspect you're right with this call. Just me being silly. For my choice, I've got a bit excited about Dane Belton this week. Played every down in week 15 in the absence of Nubin. Obviously, was very productive. 13 tackles, a pass breakup, a sack. And that was, despite an average matchup for safeties typically against the Ravens. He had the kind of alignment we tend to look for. We talked about it a moment ago with Fitzpatrick as well. Plenty of box snaps, quite a few snaps in the slot as well, which we don't hate. And I think, kind of similar usage in week 16 is on the cards. Now, I know, we all know that we shouldn't expect similar levels of production this week to what we had last week. That would be stupid. That would be foolish. But his matchup is excellent against the Falcons. So I like his chances of another solid game, good game at least. Now, the one thing that does hurt his chances, of course, is his status in the week with that knee injury. But assuming, I think if he trends in the right direction, I kind of want all of the Belton this week. What say you? Where do you stand on him, John? I'm interested in this one.
Yeah, no, I like Dane Belton quite a bit. I talked about him actually going into last week. I liked him, and luckily ended up working out. I had him in one of my playoff lineups, helped me get a win. So I'm hoping for more of the same from him this week. Like you said, it's going to be very hard to replicate or come close to what he did last week, but he has a chance here against Atlanta, who are allowing the most tackles per game to the safety position, and they've actually outperformed that number even more over the last 3 games. Now, again, they're changing quarterbacks, so that maybe makes a little bit of a difference as far as how their offense is going to be able to produce opportunities, but I don't think it necessarily changes the offensive philosophy for the Falcons just because of a change of quarterback. So that should still play in his favor. But more importantly, that the box role in that Tyler Nubin role that he's absorbed is really, really juicy. So like that quite a bit for Belton.
For sure. Other DBs that we considered in this spot, other DBs we like this week, who do you have?
So I added Grant Delpit of the Cleveland Browns going against the Bengals. He's one of the other players that I see a lot in start sit questions every single week. I'm almost always drawn to say start Delpit. This week gets a top 10 matchup for safety tackles against the Bengals. He's making the most of his box heavy deployment as well. 11.6% tackle rate is excellent for the position. It's better than a lot of linebackers as well. So really like Grant Delpit quite a bit. And the other name I put was Xavier Woods of the Carolina Panthers going against the Arizona Cardinals. So he's put together like a quietly productive season. He's currently sitting as the overall safety 12 on the year per our scoring. He's managed an above average 10% tackle rate, playing about 32% of his snaps in the box. The box snap rate isn't like overly exciting, but it's still a solid deployment for IDP purposes as he continues to basically never leave the field. It's been a big part in his value as well. I think he's played more snaps than any other safety on the year, and draws a matchup against Arizona, who are allowing the 6th most tackles per game to opposing safeties, and the 2nd most per game over the last 3 games at 18.7, just behind Atlanta at 21.3. So nice matchup for Xavier Woods, name that doesn't get talked about a lot, and I thought maybe deserved a little bit of love here.
He does, right? And I've got quite a few shares of both of those guys. They are tackle heavy scoring formats, and that's that does kind of play to their strengths. Obviously, Woods has been a bit better with the big plays this year than Delpit, but that's not hard, I guess. But yeah, these are both guys who have kind of I'm pretty happy with what they've done this year, and I think they're good calls. They do fly under the radar a bit, and yeah, good shouts. I've gone with Hufanga this week. Great to see him back. Didn't play every down in week 14 when he got back, but missed like only a couple of snaps last week. And I think he's down to be busy in week 15. Mustafa and Brown were questionable with injuries last I looked. So yeah, I kind of like his outlook, especially in what is a really good matchup, or should be a good matchup with I think it's the Dolphins they're playing. So that's looking good. And then Cam Bynum as well, very productive over the last month. Plenty of box snaps, tasty matchup against the Seahawks.
Nice. Yeah. No, I like like you mentioned with Hufanga. I know he only played like 72% last week, but it was his first week back. So he's another guy that I think just kind of moves closer to a full-time role this week as he gets healthier here. So not a surprise to see his snaps down, but I like the matchup again as well, going against the Dolphins. 2nd most tackles per game to the safety position.
There you go. So which DBs should we be avoiding this week, John?
So I went with Geno Stone of the Cincinnati Bengals. So it's been back-to-back weeks with an interception, I think, for him. I think it was a pick 6 last week. So he's been productive for IDP purposes. My concern with him is not as sustainable. He's playing a primarily deep role. 73% of his snaps have come from a deep alignment. Going against the Cleveland Browns as well. They're 26th in tackles per game to opposing safeties. They're also going to be starting Dorian Thompson-Robinson at quarterback. We don't know how much of a shift that's going to be from Jameis, but I imagine it's not going to be as YOLO ball as Jameis Winston likes to play. But yeah, for me, like Geno Stone, he's not somebody that I'm necessarily looking at chasing that production. Again, don't get caught up in past production for IDP. It's not indicative of future production. I would much rather play like a Jordan Battle over him every time, just based on Jordan Battle's box heavy role, even if it's just, even if he's only playing like 90% of the total snaps versus Stone's 100%, Battle's playing 44% of his snaps in the box. So tend to like that a lot more for sustainable production.
Yeah, I think you're right to draw attention to this idea that Thompson Robinson isn't going to be throwing it as deep, and that Stone does play deep a lot. And no, that doesn't necessarily mean that Stone can't produce good tackle volume just because Thompson Robinson doesn't throw it deep, or doesn't throw it deep as often as Winston, because as you said as well, we haven't seen a huge amount of Thompson Robinson. It might well be that he comes out and starts launching it down the field, a la sort of I don't know, Jake Plummer. I don't know, but yeah. But yeah, I'm not a massive fan. Too many red flags there. The third interception in a row is unlikely, and I'm scared about that utilization as well. Like you, he's playing so deep so often, and the matchup isn't good. So yeah, you've kind of talked about all the good points there, all the bad points rather. So my DB dislike, another guy that I'm avoiding this week, PJ Locke, and I could pick any number of reasons why. 6.8% tackle efficiency, that ranks 104th out of 112 safeties, John. Season high of only 7 tackles. Forced a fumble last week, that was nice, but it's the tackle production. It's just trending in the wrong direction. 76 snaps last week, only had 2 tackles. So yeah, kind of the final nail in the coffin, if I needed one, John, was that the week 16 matchup against the Chargers is terrible. Yeah. So for all of those reasons, and probably more that I could find if I looked any deeper than I already have, do not start PJ Locke this week.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to get behind PJ Locke as a start here. Like you said, it's been the Brandon Jones show, which has been nice because we like Brandon Jones coming into the year, and he's kind of been the tackle vacuum there in the deep secondary. So that's taken away from PJ Locke's value, and I'm fine with it, to be honest.
For sure. So who else are you avoiding at the DB spot?
Yeah, so I also included Jonathan Owens of the Chicago Bears. So Jonathan Owens has been filling in nicely for Jaquan Brisker, who's on injured reserve. He's actually been very productive. I've had to put him in a few spots, and he's been a fine starting IDP safety. The only problem is that Elijah Hicks came back last week, and Elijah Hicks was starting ahead of Owens prior to Elijah Hicks getting injured while Brisker was on IR. So with that case, we did see not necessarily Hicks taking over the full-time starting role from Owens again, but they actually split the role 55-45. It was in favor of Owens. He had 6 tackles. It was still a nice game, but it just, honestly, I would rather one of them just be flat out benched, because at this point now, none of them is useful for us because we can't trust them at 55 and 45% of snaps. So yeah, I'm just making sure that people are avoiding that situation, because we like the Jaquan Brisker replacement, but now it's split into 2 players and we can only start one of them. We do not want to start a part-time guy. Yeah.
We say every week, why would you ever start a defensive back who isn't playing a really healthy snap share? You're not struggling to find players that fit that criteria in the same way as you do at other positions like linebacker. So yeah, just go out and find a guy who's playing way more than the 55. 55 wasn't it that Owens played last week?
Yeah, for sure. And then. Yeah, the other name I put was Coby Bryant of the Seattle Seahawks. So he's another one of those really deep safeties. He plays 81% deep, but he's been productive lately. He had an 8-tackle game last week. He had an interception the week before. I think he had a pick 6 a couple weeks before that. So he's definitely on IDP radars. But it's, again, we don't like the deep role. And especially we don't like the deep role in a bad matchup. So going against the Minnesota Vikings this week, who ranked 28th in tackles per game to the safety position. So Coby Bryant is another player that I just don't want to chase the production from, as much as, the name is very cool and we might like that part of it as well. But try not to factor that too much into the analysis here.
Got you. I'll round out our quick fades with mine. Julian Blackmon. Spending much more time as the deep safety in 2024 than we saw last year. 8% tackle efficiency, not as poor as PJ Locke, no, but yeah, still pretty poor. There's just nothing left, I think, after Speed, Franklin, and Cross have kind of had their fill. There's just he could be the best safety in the world, I think. But unless he's unless he's playing on a different team, there's just going to be nothing left after those guys have had their share. And then my final guy, and I guess our final nomination of the night, John, is Jeremy Chinn. Bit of a cheat here, low hanging fruit. We know he suffered a concussion in week 15, so he may not play at all. And even if he does, really poor matchup against the Eagles again. They haven't been kind to opposition safeties in terms of producing good tackle volume. So yeah, two good reasons to avoid Chinn. There you have it. Okay, look, so our week 16 nominations are in. There was a huge amount of them this week. Thank you, John, for helping me to extend the number of players that we'd ordinarily talk about. We thought it was really key to do this week because, we want to be, as I said at the outset, as helpful to as many people as possible. So, hope this has been in some way helpful. Let's do a quick recap of those nominations because, as I say, there was a lot of them. John's main likes for week 16 were Christian Harris, Chris Jones, and Minkah Fitzpatrick, with additional mentions for Tyrice Knight, Eric Wilson, Dorian Williams, Greg Rousseau, Rashan Gary, Grant Delpit, and Xavier Woods. My primary likes were Bobby Wagner, Will Anderson, and Dane Belton, with additional mentions for Edgerrin Cooper, TJ Edwards, Tremaine Edmonds, Danielle Hunter, Nick Herbig, Talanoa Hufanga, and Cam Bynum. Big deep breath. John's main fades were Jahlani Tavai, Tuli Tuipulotu, Geno Stone, with additional mentions for Troy Dye, Drake Greenlaw, Kayvon Thibodeaux, John Owens, and Coby Bryant. And mine were Omar Speights, Carl Granderson, and PJ Locke, with extra mentions for Drue Tranquill, Kenneth Murray, Chase Young, Keion White, Christian Barmore, Julian Blackmon, and finally Jeremy Chinn. John, that is quite the list. Plenty for everyone there, right?
Definitely, hopefully. And obviously there's plenty of names out there, but I'm sure people will ask their start-sit questions in your comments as well and can help them out there.
For sure. Okay, well, look, I've taken up enough of your time, my friend. I've had a blast talking IDP with you tonight, and I want to thank you for taking the time, especially at this point in the fantasy season when I know that you're as busy as ever.
Oh, appreciate you having me on. I was really looking forward to it. Like I said to you before we got on air here, and just glad that we were able to work it out and get me on here before the season ended. I'm very grateful and I appreciate it.
For sure. But look, before we sign off, for anyone unfamiliar with your IDP content, please let our audience know what you do and where they can find all of your great IDP content.
Yeah, so all my work is on pff.com. We write the IDP fantasy report there that has snap share, utilization, waiver wire targets, notes, underlying metrics, all that kind of stuff for every single IDP every single week. And I do IDP rankings over there. I do an IDP preview show. I'm going to record that actually after this, which will also cover a lot of these players. But yeah, we'll cover a few more to make it a little bit different, so I'm not repeating myself too much. It's all on pff.com, and you can check it out there.
Yeah, and I think I doubt there's many people who are listening tonight that aren't familiar with your stuff, but the IDP report that you do every Tuesday is really must have content for IDP fantasy managers, and the playoff tackle charts and the weekly tackle charts that you've been producing over the course of the season, John. We use those every week on this show, so why? And these are free, right? So they're just you tweet them out. Very kind of you, very generous of you. Everyone, if you're not using these already, you're selling yourself short. So go check them out. Thank you, John. All right, so thanks as always to anyone that has tuned in this week. Please remember to subscribe to all of our channels on all of your favorite platforms. As always, we hope you dominate your weekly matchups, especially this week in the playoffs, and especially if your opponent doesn't listen to the show. So this, as if you needed a reminder, has been the IDP preview episode on the IDP After Show, and I'll be back for week 17 with another stellar guest in Green Dot King, Mr. Mike Wallet. Bye for now.
This was the IDP After Show.